I'm Mandy Rose. I'm a research fellow at the Digital Cultures Research Centre in Bristol, and my research is looking at what happens when documentary meets networked culture. So I was very happy when Jeannie and Charlie Phillips invited me to be part of this session. I think it's really interesting. I mean, most of you, I imagine, will have heard of crowdfunding, and there's been an increasing buzz around crowdfunding and its potential for documentary in the last few years. Which kind of reached some kind of height early this year with the news that Kickstarter were expecting to raise more money next year and to distribute more money than the National Endowment for the Arts in the US. So, you know, there's something potentially very interesting going on. But I think, as we'll learn, crowdfunding is about a lot more than just fundraising, because in a sense you're opening up your project, potentially at a very early stage, to a dialogue with the public. So what we're interested in this morning is not the kind of nuts and bolts of how you crowdfund your project. We're interested in what all those effects are that aren't about the money that happen when you engage with the public in this way. We've got a perfect panel this morning to think about this topic. Malcolm McDowell, who was went from script editor to being involved in the crowdfunding aspect of God Help the Girl, a feature film that's about to come out, directed by Stuart Murdoch, of Belle and Sebastian. Javier Artigas from Spain is an activist, a sociologist, a filmmaker whose recent feature, No Res, just won the first prize at the Documenta Festival in Madrid. Jennifer Fox is a filmmaker, director, executive producer on numerous projects, including Flying, Confessions of a Free Woman, and recently My Reincarnation, which received a record amount of crowdfunding on Kickstarter. And Jeannie Finley, who's produced this session, is interested in storytelling and music, and this has manifested itself in a number of projects, including the Luminous Sounded Out recently, and Jeannie's now involved in developing a new project for the BBC, The Great Hip Hop Hoax. So a perfect panel, and we're going to kick off by watching the trailer of some of the works that we're going to be talking about in a moment, and then hearing from the panellists. So.
My father is happy with Tibet's master. He had to escape from Tibet. My father arrived to Italy, and he had to start from zero. We don't have an emotional relation, me and my father. He always treated me like the son of a master, not the father and son of any Italian family.
The important person now in India to say my son is a reincarnation of my uncle.
Everybody says, yes, I'm lucky of being an incarnation, but I would like to be not myself. I can't stand this situation.
Having children, having a family, having a career was an important vision.
I'm happy to be the normal, common father.
I'm glad, and my culture is important for me. I must save my culture. Being present on time is very, very important. One day we notice surprise. Oh, this is the end of life. What I do now? What I did?
I start to have all these strange visions with water or light rays, memories about my death.
When I saw my father, he told me again, you have to go to Tibet because there are a lot of people there waiting for you. We have like a mission, no?
tira un jamón.
Tirón, tirón.
Mira que viene finito.
I no pararan el procés de millora de la colònia de castells.
Well, the goal at the minute is to cast the three main characters, Eve, James, and Cassie.
Baby, you're blind if you just can't feel it. I'll always keep my mouth in check. Since you're clearly tied to miss likely to make it, what's on you, girl, to expect? If you find her slipping, she doesn't love you like she used to. You're my first and always. I wouldn't say I'm given to prayer, but my head is bowed, and then God knows how I really think of you.
Hello, Sound Out Records. I am the only record shop left, yes. I'm the only one left in Teesside now. It is fantastic, but it's sad. It's emotions, it's all about emotions records. Emotions and memories. I can tell you exactly what I was doing when I play a record. Where I was, who I was going out with. It's all about memories. Records hold memories. In Stockton I do sell a lot of heavy metal because it's a hard area. It's people into heavy metal and you get them into hard dance music. Oh.
Your teacher is trying to slow down the bounties and start the house crew. Let's do this!
It's not the ordinary people. It's the random
It's
people.
called the Jacksons.
The Jackson's best of all.
No, it's the English Jacksons, not the American Jacksons. They call him Mike Jackson. He written this
He
song.
wrote the song.
He
He
written
played
the
on the
song.
boogie, didn't he?
That's the one.
Anything you want, you can get it in here. I like it cool. People say I'm mad, but I don't smoke, I don't drink, I don't have a woman, so, you know, well, what do you want?
It's all the need. Will soon over. It's all the sticks. It's gathering. It's
I'd say 99% boys and 1% girls coming in by records. Yeah, out of every 100, maybe one girl. I don't know what it is, it's just blokes still like to collect things and they like to keep hold of their youth, I suppose. Never grow up. I don't grow up, it's just from responsibilities.
Malcolm, who I renamed as the actor Malcolm McDowell, Malcolm Morrison, forgive me, Jennifer Fox, come and join us. So we're going to kick off with kind of situating ourselves a bit more in the context of these projects and the crowdfunding efforts. So hearing briefly from each of the panelists about that particular project, what prompted them to think about crowdfunding and what the shape of that campaign was. So perhaps we'll kick off with Jennifer. We'll do the order of the clips on the reel. So
Sure.
Jennifer, perhaps.
Absolutely. Hi, good morning. Thank you for coming so early. We have a very unusual campaign because the film was technically finished and was already accepted at some festivals when I discovered that one of our co-producers wasn't able to deliver their percentage of the funding that they promised. And it was a big chunk. It was $100,000 that I had spent. Ouch. And I'm the main producer on a project that had about 5 co-producers, which means technically I was liable for that money. So I can't say I wanted to crowdfund. I really was dragged kicking and screaming to consider it. And I considered it because it actually was my only option not to go bankrupt. The film actually it premiered at IDFA and Leipzig and several festivals the fall that year. And it really sunk in that this money wasn't coming probably by about Christmas. We had sold off the major territories, in television territories already, so that wasn't an option. And we all know without England, US, Germany, Finland, Netherlands, etc., Switzerland was gone. Everything else in terms of funding would have been $3,000, $4,000. So very painfully, I decided, okay, I'm going to do a crowdfunding campaign. I decided that I couldn't do it alone, and I quickly built a team of 4 women, including myself, one of which who'd done a small campaign before. I'd worked with them before doing a self-theatrical on a prior film. So we knew how to work together, and we also knew about campaigns. We also knew about outreach, and I think that's very important. And then in my office is a wonderful young web geek, a self-avowed web geek. So the 4 of us made a team. We were so scared that originally we set the goal at $50,000 for a 90-day campaign. Kickstarter was still allowing 90 days back then. I don't think they are anymore. We just said, let us do the maximum number of days, because how are we going to raise $50,000? On our website, we told people that our goal was $100,000. So somehow we knew that this was our one shot or nothing to deal with this huge financial debt and outstanding bills I had to pay. We thought about it as a campaign. So thinking about a campaign means there's always new news being added, and that there are different stages of which we didn't even know what they would be in the beginning because we'd never run such a big campaign. But one of the weird things is that the disadvantage we had on the project, which was that the film was finished, and all of you in the room probably know that there's a kind of rule that you can't fund films backwards. The disadvantage became an advantage because I was doing the festival circuit, which means we could create new video all the time. So every week, a new city, a new country, new video updates. I also began to do something very radical, which is talk about our campaign at festivals. and tell people that we were still funding the film while you're seeing it on the screen. We made postcards. And so even while we were doing Q&As about the film, we announced our crowdfunding campaign. The other thing I learned that really surprised us, since I was really having trouble saying, give me money, please give me money, please give me more money, I started to write real emails. And I created with my team a kind of very personal dialogue where every time I wrote an email, it had real information in it. I was really struggling with crowdfunding. Politically, I was struggling with it. Personally, I had to overcome a lot of obstacles about asking for money. So people began to tune into the campaign because they actually wanted to read my blogs, which was very surprising. And they were weekly. However, every blog was read by all 3 other team members. And they were edited, so I can't say they were only my blogs. We thought I was writing too long, and it turned out that the longer I wrote, the more hits we had reading it, because you can track all those things. We also began to release excerpts from the outtakes of the film as a way to give people reasons to read the emails, etc. So we tried to keep adding new news. The campaign hit 50,000 in 45 days, exactly halfway through. And then suddenly we had to rebrand the campaign and take the people who were already following us and say, thank you very much. Now we're going to shoot for $100,000. And that was a very hard turn to make, because I actually got some emails saying, you lied to us. And we could say, actually, we didn't lie. We were scared shitless. And so if you read on our Kickstarter, you'll see where it says we were actually shooting for 100. Please join us in continuing. And it was a hard corner to turn, but people turned it. Now, the main last point I want to make in my intro is we're dealing with, the first question always in crowdfunding is, who's your niche audience? And I recently had someone calling me in Sweden doing a failing crowdfunding campaign saying, what can we do? And I said, well, who's your niche audience? And she said, and this was almost at the end of the campaign, well, I don't know. And then she said, well, women. And women is not a target audience. It's half the population. So the thing about a film, as you saw from the trailer, this is a film about spirituality. It's a Tibetan Buddhist. So our key audience has to be first the followers of this teacher, then the followers of Tibetan Buddhism, then spirituality. And we were very, very active building an email list. We already had a very strong email list from my last film of about 12,000 people, which is high for Europeans. That probably dropped because it was a different target audience. It was women. It probably dropped to about 8,000, and then we rebuilt it back up to 12,000. Then we were asking Buddhist partners to e-blast for us about the campaign. And some of them actually burnt out over the 90 days and said, sorry, you're asking too much. And we had to build new partners. So there was a lot of activity of building partnerships to get on the web and reach people on the campaign. It turned out at the end, in the last 10 days, the film was at about 70,000. In 10 days, we made another 75,000 probably. And what we saw happening was all those people who'd been consolidating around this campaign, and we had met about 72 countries had contributed to the project, because Tibetan Buddhism is a very international subject. They suddenly we hit that tipping point where we had kind of a feeding frenzy, particularly in the last 5 days, where you could see donations almost every 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. So it really spiraled at the end, and that's also because some people took it on to be promoters. I don't know why, people I didn't know. We had a woman in Italy who made it her job to talk about the campaign all over the web, someone in Germany, someone in South America. We had a donation from China that turned out, a $10,000 donation that turned out to be 50 people got together to make one donation. So the viralness actually began to function, and I think that's why we made it 3 times our goal. We ended up at $150,000, and then we became the #1 crowdfunding campaign for a finished film of any kind, and we were originally the #4 crowdfunding campaign for a film. I think now we've moved down to like 8 because it's already been over a year since the campaign was finished.
Thanks, Jennifer. And Javier, very different context, different country. So what was the story with your campaign?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Ginny for inviting us here, Ginny and Charlie and Mandy for the presentation. Yes, our story is completely different. Actually, we have a very unsuccessful crowdfunding story, since we could just fund around 5,000 euros, which is not much. Our story, I'm not a producer. I'm actually a sociologist who started making films like 5 years ago. And at the beginning of 2010, I had made 3 short social documentaries with a production company. So in this context, I found out that one of my most beloved neighborhoods in Barcelona was going to be completely demolished. And I felt like I had to make a film about that. So I went to speak with the production company I had been working with. And they liked the project. They said it was a great project, but I had to wait a year until they could start producing that. But the problem was that a year later, the neighborhood wouldn't exist anymore, so I had to start filming. So I just started filming myself with my camera, which was not very good at the beginning. And some friends started helping me, and this is where, for me, this is where the crowdfunding started. Actually, we always talk about crowdfunding, but not much about crowdsourcing, which is also a very important subject. So in times of crisis and scarcity, people tend to help each other, and this is a very nice thing that happened at the beginning, that everybody was helping me because they knew that I needed to do that, not only for myself, but to inform people what was going on in the city. I live in Barcelona, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. Anyway, because of this crowdsourcing aid from my friends, we could show some material to people who knew about film and stuff, and they all agreed that the material was good, that the film had a lot of potential, and that we should get some aid from the government. Problem is that in our country, you can only deal with the government, with government aids for film if you have a production company, which I didn't have, and I was not willing to talk again to the production company I had worked with. So we had to take a decision, which was to make our own production company. So this was the best solution, but I had a problem, which is that I had always been an anti-capitalist, and I didn't feel like really having a company and starting business with that. So for me, it was very clear that a production company should have non-commercial goals, which in culture involve producing under free licenses, which is Creative Commons. So this was like the compromise I made in building this production company. And it was quite a hard goal because as you can understand, if you have Creative Commons license on your production, there's no exclusivity in your work, so there's no distributors, no television channels, no co-producers interested in what you're producing. So we only had one way to produce our stuff, which was crowdfunding. So crowdfunding was something very new in Spain in 2010. You cannot kickstart in Spain, and there were no platforms established. So we started our own crowdfunding system, which for most of the people was very weird to ask for money on the internet. And that's probably the reason why we're not so successful. So as I said, we had 2 times of campaign in crowdfunding, and we got about 5,000 euros. Now, the important thing that happened here was not the money we got at the beginning, but the interest that raised on many people. So because of the crowdfunding campaign, a lot of people started to be aware of the problem we were dealing with. That means the destruction, the demolition of this neighborhood. So people started getting curious about it, so we started getting a lot of feedback per email and Facebook, etc., about what was going on and how we were filming that, how we were going to inform people about the problem we were dealing with. So we decided to have an event in which we would explain the crowdfunding campaign, explain to people why we were raising money, and 400 people showed up, which was amazing. And this was so successful, so many people came and got interested in the project that we decided to have another event a couple months later in which we made this big party in which we would inform people about gentrification, which is the problem that we were documenting in the movie. And around 1,000 people showed up, and we raised like 3 or 4 more thousand euros. So what we realized is that crowdfunding was very practical to have some money at the beginning to make the first investment. But the most important thing and the most beautiful thing that happened is that we built a community, a very strong community, which kept meeting not on the internet but on real meetings, because we had a lot of different events afterwards. And we call this the critical mass. There's like a critical mass around our movie that kind of controlled how we work and stuff. So we basically had these work in progress meetings, like every month, in which we showed the footage that we were filming. We showed some sequences that we were editing, and we asked the people most of them who had paid for this project and who assisted to the parties and so. They told us, they gave us feedback about how they feel about how we are working. So we can say it's a collective work. Of course, I'm the director of this movie, and I have a point of view, a very strong point of view about this subject, but a lot of people were criticizing the fact that we wouldn't talk enough about the role of the mayor of Barcelona in this problem, or we should talk about this company being involved in this dirty business. So it was very interesting to have all this feedback because, and it was like research, a very easy research on the topic, which was for free for us. Plus, in building this community, we were empowering people in our city about the problems that we are facing. And on a commercial point of view, we were building the future audience of this movie. So I think it's taking too long. I'm just gonna finish. The big surprise on this project is that No Res, our movie, got so popular before it was finished that the Catalan television got interested in it. And because of this, around 10,000 euros that we could raise with the crowdfunding and the parties we organized, plus the crowdsourcing, etc., you know. Let's say we had around 10,000 euros. We could invest to make a very precarious rough cut of the movie that we presented on the television, and they just loved it. They said, we want to co-produce this movie. So that's when we could start financing the project properly. We got enough funding to finish the movie, to have a good post-production and everything. But they had a huge problem, and so did we, which is that this movie was under Creative Commons. It didn't have copyright. There were no exclusivity rights. So they asked us to just forget that and have a copyright. And we said, no, that's the deal we have with these hundreds of people that have been supporting us. And this is a movie we have made for the people, not for consumers. We don't want people to pay for this movie in a shopping mall. We just want this movie to be online. We just want this movie to flow. Because we want the people to be aware of the problem we are documenting. So we had many talks with them. We thought this was never going to happen, but at the end they decided to change their protocol, their producing protocol, so that they could include Creative Commons productions, which was a huge step in our country. So now there's an open door for any free culture projects to be produced in our public television. And yeah, I think there's many other things I could say, but I think that's the most important one.
Really interesting case study. Malcolm.
Okay. Hello. So God Help the Girl, if you don't know about it, was, it still is actually, but it was as well, an album by Stuart Murdoch from Belle and Sebastian, where he had girls kind of sing Belle and Sebastian songs. And he started thinking about making it into a movie. So he wrote a script, and Barry Mendel, the producer of Wes Anderson's first 3 films, I think, Life Aquatic and Royal Tenenbaums and Rushmore, loves the band, so he kind of got together and they started formulating a plan to make this movie, and it didn't really get the funding that they wanted to get, mainly because Stuart's not a scriptwriter, they couldn't really get the funding. And people weren't prepared to take the chance on Stuart and his film, even though it had a marvelous music and a great creative team behind it. So a plan was kind of hatched to do a Kickstarter campaign because of they'd budgeted everything. And apparently there was a little hole in DVD distribution and digital distribution of like £100,000 or something like that. And the plan was to fill that, do a Kickstarter campaign, but also through the Kickstarter campaign, generate good PR, show that people do want this movie made and all that kind of stuff. So I had no part in that. At that point, I was the script editor on God Help the Girl, helping Stuart with the script. And they decided to do it at the end of last year, around about Christmas. So everyone basically went away for Christmas, and there was no one to do the campaign. So they kind of said to me, do you want to do it? Because I don't know why they asked me. But I basically took over the campaign, ran it over Christmas. I was really successful and good at kind of doing it, and the money started to come in. So I continued on that capacity, and we struggled, and we used Stuart, obviously Belle and Sebastian's name, which kind of, we'll go into it later on, but it had its kind of problems because we used his fan base, and some of that fan base didn't like the fact that we were giving away gifts and all this kind of stuff. Meet Stuart Murdoch, play Scrabble with him was one of the awards, which is pretty cool, but yeah, you can see why they get annoyed. But we ended up, even though we struggled, we ended up getting £120,000, so it was £20,000 over our budget, and at the time, probably it's changed because Kickstarter is making so much money. At the time, it was the 3rd top narrative film, like a kind of fiction film, in Kickstarter history. It's probably like the 100th now, but who knows? So that's me, and that's God Help the Girl.
Okay, thanks, Malcolm. So over to you, Jeannie.
Okay, I just want to thank everyone for coming. This is my first session I've produced for Sheffield. And I wanted to produce this session because I've been to lots of kind of how do I make lots of money out of crowdfunding sessions over the past few years, because I guess it's, it's something that's changing in this country. Certainly, I think our attitudes to the idea of crowdfunding, I think we're all becoming a bit less British about doing it. And I directed Sound It Out, and that's a film that was made for a very small, tiny, modest budget. But we did 4 crowdfunding campaigns on that film and really grew our audience. We ended up distributing the film ourselves. Sally Hodgson, who's my producer of marketing and distribution, is just over there. And the team was basically Sally and I. And we were able to distribute the film to, I think we ended up showing it at 45 UK cinemas because the BFI asked us to be a case study in the audience development parts of crowdfunding. So we we got a P&A award from the BFI by match funding our crowdfunded budget, basically. But I kind of came to crowdfunding because I was stuck in a legal hellhole on a commissioned film, and it was going nowhere. And all I was doing was having meetings. And there became a point where I was just like, having meetings all the time is not being a filmmaker. I need to hold a camera. So I started to make my kind of ramshackle film. I'd never filmed anything myself. I'd always had a crew. So I abandoned the crew, worked for a year with no money. When I grew up with Tom, the guy who runs Sound It Out Records, and kept going in the shop. And there came this moment, you know when you hear a good song on the radio and you know that you just love it. And there was this point where I knew that there was a good film in Sound It Out. I knew that there was a film there because it was about my home, about Teesside and an industrial past, but also this kind of strange analog dinosaur carrying on, supported by 99% men. And I thought there was an interesting film there. I remember pitching it to a British broadcaster, and they just went, no, this is very boring. And I just thought, you know what, I don't want to have any more meetings about this film. I just want to make the film. So that's what I did. So filmed for a year, no money. And then Charlie Phillips from DocFest, as you probably all know, suggested that crowdfunded it. And really kind of went into it quite blind. Just, I put my trailer up, my art will get me my money. And did quite a very long, wordy campaign. And Indiegogo put me in touch with a very outspoken filmmaker who'd had a successful campaign with shorts in New York, and he just said, put yourself in the trailer, pitch the film, and make a connection with your audience. And I thought he was talking a load of rubbish, and I was British, and I wasn't going to do that. And then so I ignored him, and we raised 10p. It was terrible. So then I recut the trailer, put myself in it, got over my phobia of being filmed because I hate it, and started to connect to people. The money just started to come in. I mean, we're talking tiny budget. I think our first campaign was like for $5,000 or something like that. But the connection that we had with people was brilliant. It was fantastic. And it was almost like the connection symbolized an idea that there was a support for the film. And I felt like me and Sally were on this kind of ramshackle journey of, wow, we can really make this, and there's an audience demand for it. And we tried to really tailor the perks. So I had a meeting quite early on with a distributor which was a music distributor, and he was like, we'll sell your film in every record shop in the country. We'll stack them high and sell them cheap. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. I want to make a beautiful double gatefold DVD that looks like a record with grooves on. And my background is being an artist, and I like the idea that making this film enabled me to have a much more direct connection with my audience in the way that you would if you were making a handmade artwork. So I tried to make it as personal as possible. So we started to build the Facebook group and the Twitter, and so everyone who funded the film, I emailed personally and thanked. I asked them to tell 5 friends who might be interested, and I dedicated videos to them on our Facebook. So if Jennifer had funded it, I would find a song by a famous Jennifer, or have their name in the title. You know, it's a bit of fun, but it was that you are my audience, and I want you to come along this journey with me. So I had people that funded all 4 campaigns, and it became just this much bigger thing than just making the film. It was about sharing a common sensibility. It became this bigger narrative about, you know, we're losing personal contact with shops, independent shops, and where you spend your money is really important. Every pound can help, and it remains local. And it seemed that the way that we raised the money reflected the ethos of the film. And just like one very small anecdote, which came out, I think, because we had put the film out there before the film was finished. Some guy I met like years and years ago knew about the film. He'd seen about it on Facebook or something, and he works for Orange now in the telephone, in customer care. And this woman phoned up and said, "Oh, I lost my phone last night at the BIFA Awards, the British Independent Film Awards." And he was like, "Oh, you work in film? Okay, you need to know about my friend's film. She's making it at the moment." And it turned out she's the programmer for the whole Soho House group. So he put us in touch with her. And he'd only done that because he knew, because we were banging on about the film before it was finished. And she ended up, we did all these preview screenings. She just said, "What do you need?" We showed the film at the Electric for their members. So the guy from Empire came and hosted my screening. So we got a great review in Empire. Someone who programs BBC Breakfast came and saw it and put us on the telly. And it really helped this kind of discovery. But I really believe that that thing of inviting your audience in makes them... I just feel like the people that took part in the crowdfunding felt like they owned the film. So when it came to the distribution, we distributed ourselves, but we also partnered with Dogwolf. And so they're doing our DVD, and you can do pop-up screenings with Dogwolf, so anyone can host a screening. So we've done pop-up screenings in record shops, in town halls, in village halls. We're partnered with the British Federation of Film Societies. And a lot of people who funded the film either came to a screening or have hosted their own screenings. And it's not their film, but they've taken it on, which was amazing. And we really looked at what is our audience. Teesside expats living abroad, Teesside expats living in London who've missed the north. You know, we became the official film of Record Store Day because we had that conversation before the film was finished. So on Record Store Day itself, I screened at Rough Trade East in London, you know, one of the most iconic record shops in this country, and then flew to New York and showed at the Lincoln Center on Record Store Day itself. It was this crazy journey because originally this wasn't a film, this was a film, it sounds trite, but it was made for love. And I really thought that I would only give the film to the people who funded it and we'd sell it in the shop. Like it's in cinemas in Germany and in Canada, it's coming out in America. It's been this crazy journey. One of my last things I'm going to say is that it really helped inform, because we got to know our audience through doing lots of Q&As and also having a dialogue with people. It helped inform decisions about what's the story, how do we tell the story of the film. So when it came to distribution, we split the deal with Dogwolf so that we could put out our own version of the DVD that was very special, hand-numbered, and we put out a vinyl soundtrack, four-track EP on blue vinyl, and the crowdfunding paid for that, and which was amazing. It was like sending out this little special thing into the world, and we set up a waiting list for it and sold most of those in the first 5 days of them being released. But I made a no HMV clause, no supermarket clause with Dogwolf, because it would be, that whole stack 'em high, sell 'em cheap does not fit the film, and would be a massive betrayal to, I think, to the people that funded the film. I asked everyone who funded the film to tell me why they did, and to tell me the first and last record that they bought. And one woman said, "I funded this film because small shops give us hope." And I kept thinking about this one statement when it came to, well, where do we sell this? I thought, I've got to make it special. So lastly, I'm so kind of encouraged by the participation I've had with the audience and the stories that people have sent me that I launched yesterday, More Than Music, which is an interactive artwork, which is kind of a sister project to Sound It Out, where we've worked with a guy called Gareth Howell, and we've hacked a Google map, and we've made an interactive it's like a memory bank, basically. So you can click on the map, and you can upload a story about the record shop that changed your life there. And we've started to get loads of great stories in from kind of very, normal, mundane to quite heartbreaking and the idea is that it explores the centre theme of the film, but it's trying to mimic that audience interaction without asking them for money, although the money is the thing in a way that has sealed the deal. The money seemed to confirm the commitment to our project in a way that just asking them to have a transaction with us that was free wouldn't have done. I don't know whether that's the same for you guys, but the idea that people bought into it, and it's not been a bed of roses, I don't think. It's been a whole lot of work, but I think that buying in, and if they like the film, they really like it. My plug for my website is just go to the soundoutdoc.com website, and then it's /more-than-music. So please tell your friends, because that's the way these things get out there into the world.
Thanks, Jeannie. So lots of really interesting threads in there about the kind of benefits around research insights, around community building and audience building. And I thought perhaps we could tease out that business about community, about the relationships, the direct relationships with your potential audience. And I just wondered if anybody got any particular stories that highlight how that worked for them, or times when that was very vivid. Yeah, Jennifer, do.
I think for me it was a surprise because we had this huge financial debt. So of course my first instinct was how to get money. But very quickly I saw that it wasn't about getting money, but about this exchange. And it was about giving. And that people were getting enormous amounts by participating in the process of an artistic endeavor, even beyond the subject of the film. And it was really highlighted. One of the first donors we had was some guy in Germany. I don't know how he even found it. And he started to dialogue with me, and eventually along the festival tour I met him. And he came up to me and said, being part of your campaign, and he'd probably given $25, has changed my life because I'm an accountant. And suddenly I feel connected to a creative journey that I have a stake in. And I'm really involved. And that gave me this reflection also that we at the table and us in the room are privileged. I mean, we suffer for our art, but we also are privileged to be doing something we really want, that we're really passionate about, and most people actually aren't. And so what I saw is this kind of democratic patronage where an ordinary person can have this highlight in their life, being connected to a developmental process that is either about a social issue or an artistic issue, or about saving music that they really care about. And maybe in their normal life they aren't able to do that. So I saw that over and over again. So my actual focus shifted quite a bit in the campaign, and my thinking about it shifted quite a bit in having a relationship that I was actually frightened of. Because for me, I'd always worked with commissioning editors or grant bodies where you're dealing one-on-one, so it's only a one-person dialogue that you have to admit you need money. And suddenly I was involved in a dialogue with potentially millions of people saying we were looking for funding. And I found it also my fear. I suddenly wasn't afraid of that dialogue. I found people very respectful. And also I was afraid at first, well, I have to talk to all of them. And like Jeannie, and like probably Xavier and you, I wrote back everybody. I had a personal, and suddenly I wasn't afraid of that, even when we got criticism. Like the person who wrote me and said, you lied to us at 50, I thought you hit your mark. And when I wrote him back and explained, they got it, and then that turned into something else. So my fear of audience changed, so.
Interesting, interesting. But Malcolm, you touched on something that I thought perhaps we should also look at, which is the hazards of that sense of ownership. You know, you were mentioning something around the fans objecting to the prize of a Scrabble game with Stuart Murdoch. So tell us a bit more about that.
I don't think they objected to the Scrabble game, particularly. I just think some, music for some people like football, and Stuart for some people is a sacred mythical figure, I suppose, who shouldn't be brought down to our level. And I suppose playing Scrabble with people gets a few people angry. The main thing was, God Help the Girl is Stuart's solo album, and the film's his solo effort, and it's away from Belle and Sebastian. Belle and Sebastian is his big bread and butter, so to speak, and a lot of people are very precious about that thing, and we were kind of using Belle and Sebastian's name to get and their audience and their community, because we had a pre-established community. We weren't building one, we weren't finding these people anywhere. We were mining the one that was there. So I think even people, some of the members of Belle and Sebastian had kind of got a bit, like this is going a bit too far. We don't, it's their livelihood, and they kind of said to Stuart, and Stuart got a bit his wording was really funny. He said, "I really need to lay low." So we had a period in the project where we didn't use Belle and Sebastian, we didn't use any of those things. And the really good thing was, what came out of that was there was a lot of other people who were just into, it's a musical set in Glasgow. There's people who like musicals, there's people who like Glasgow, there's people who might like both of those things. So we found a few other different people in that kind of lull. If that answers the question.
Sure,
I just rambled there for a minute.
Yeah. And Javier, it sounds like crowdfunding led you then into a completely different way of making a film. And did you find that kind of negotiating with your supporters? You spoke about it was a collective, but also you had a very strong sense as a director of the work you wanted to produce. Was that a difficult negotiation? It's an interesting dynamic.
It's a good question. Probably it was a difficult negotiation, but it was also the reason why I was making films. As I mentioned, I'm actually a sociologist, so for me, making film was a way of maybe not changing society, but making people aware of problems that are around them. And for me, this negotiation was the perfect way to have this, to inform people, to have this feedback, direct feedback about what we were trying to do with the movie. So our goal was reached at the very first moment that we started with the production, which was amazing, because suddenly I kind of felt like, I wanted to make a film. I don't want to deal with hundreds of people and discuss with them how I should make the film. But suddenly I said, hey, this is exactly the reason why I was making this movie, to inform all these people about what's going on in the city, and to make them aware and to empower them. So in that sense, it was amazing, and I think it's worth fighting for that. And although it's hard because not everybody agrees in the way how you are making the movie, there's people who would like to have a lot of interviews in the movie. There are no interviews in my movie, for example. It's a very radical way of observational filming. So not many people agree with that at the beginning, but if you get the chance to show them that sometimes still pictures and observation has a lot more power to communicate than a straight interview. They can also learn something about audiovisual culture, and you can learn a lot about what people expect from documentaries. So there's a constant feedback, and I think this was a great experience.
Okay. Well, let's throw it open to the floor for questions, but please, hang on, and the microphone will come to you. Take that gentleman in the red shirt first. let's hang on a moment and try and get it recorded.
Try another one? Oh, here we go.
Ah,
Okay.
you're there.
First, a fantastic panel. I mean, really, really interesting and a great, diverse series of stories which does address this aspect that hasn't yet really been focused on very much. I'm particularly interested in this. I'm in the last few hours of my own first experiment in crowdfunding now, and I only started researching it a couple of months ago, and I've learnt a huge amount in the process, and what you're talking about is really, really interesting to me, especially as now, hopefully, if it works, I approach the next phase is what you do with all these people and this community that you've kind of created. But there's one thing in particular that I spent a lot of time thinking about and debating, and Jennifer, you touched on it with yours, and I think Malcolm as well. I mean, my project is about a band, and if you look at Indiegogo and Kickstarter, there are a lot of projects about bands or films about bands, and quite often the perks that they offer are connected to autograph this or time with the person and that. And I spent quite a lot of time talking to the band about this. In the end, we decided not to have any perks of those kind, because it was very important for us both to maintain our independence. And this has caused a lot of confusion, because a lot of people, they see it about the band, they assume the band is producing it. And the band didn't want that because they didn't want to be seen to be too impoverished to fund their own DVDs, as they've funded their own concert DVDs in the past. And from my point of view, I needed to, because it's an observational documentary about them, I needed to, to have my credibility with broadcasters and anyone else, I needed to maintain my distance as well. I mean, I don't think there's any answer or solution to this, because people end up being confused anyway. But, or particularly, Jennifer, with your one about, you said you engaged with the Buddhist communities. Now, all of a sudden then you're getting into slightly, well, I know you'd already made the film, so maybe that's what makes it different, but editorially, is that seen as a kind of some kind of endorsement that you may sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable with? And, well, Mark, you've already described some of the issues you've had with the fans.
Sure.
I just think it's really interesting.
It's a big question. We had that problem. The film is my 20-year filming my own Buddhist teacher. Although I'm not in the film, he is my teacher. I wouldn't have had the access for 20 years if he wasn't. So I was always really concerned about that issue of with broadcasters and with the world, and the whole issue of, is it something being asked for by the teacher? Funnily enough, I think crowdfunding falls into a zone that nobody's dealt with, and that I say on our crowdfunding site, that the authorship of the film is ours, unlike Xavier. I mean, it wasn't that, in other words, that giving money doesn't imply any control, and I say that quite clearly, and we say it all over the place. But I think it's a really interesting question, because I've never had like, for example, Public Television America is very sensitive to who is giving money. But the amounts are so small on crowdfunding that it falls under the radar. So it hasn't seemed to have become an issue that the film is funded in part by a lot of Buddhists. So I don't really have an answer, but I have been afraid of it and have not found it a problem.
I think it would have been more of a problem if you hadn't made the film yet.
Not necessarily. I think, weirdly, crowdfunding is uncharted territory, and it is a mass of people, so it's very hard to say that there's authorship implied. But that's just a totally subjective opinion. Jeannie?
I never felt that, that I was dealing with 437 executive producers.
No, well, obviously not.
It felt like a transaction, in that they were buying into the project and they got a perk that they wanted. Or, a lot of people they said they didn't want the perks. They wanted just to support the film or the journey. But I tried not to, I just made my film. Tried not to think about, will people be disappointed? What if they don't like it? And it's like, well, people don't like films all the time. Should it be different because they paid for it?
We had also, just wanted to say, some big items donated by the two protagonists who are the subject, who are Buddhist teachers. So it would have been a case where it could be seen that they were funding the film. One item I think went for like $9,000 and another for $8,000 or whatever. It never came up. I just wanted to tell you that.
And I guess if I'm allowed to make an observation, I guess it's also true that actually, because it's a very open process, it may be, you can see what's going on. The public can see in a way where perhaps, that it's more transparent than a sponsored film can be.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, and there is a session later this morning about sponsorship where I think some of these issues can be picked up on as well. So let me take another question, because there are various other people who are wanting to...
It would just be remiss of me in any crowdfunding campaign not to plug something this evening at the East End Bar at 8 o'clock and 10:30. My film is about the Ukulele Orchestra of Great Britain. George Hinchliffe, director and ukulele legend, will be performing at 8 o'clock and 10:30 at the East End Bar tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gentleman in the blue T-shirt, second row there.
Hi, this is kind of a general question to anyone kind of on the panel. Taking film out of the way, you all seem now to be kind of community ambassadors for independent shops and music, for the Buddhist community, and for gentrification kind of things. How now, after the film is out and with that community, do you see you continue to work with those and bringing them onto other projects? Or do you see that now that kind of transactions happened, you can create a distance and move on? Or is this something else? You will be working with community again. How does this now affect you guys as ambassadors, really, for those communities, but taking the film aspect out of the way now, so just as community ambassadors?
Who feels like coming in on that? I guess it's partly a question about next steps beyond these projects.
Well, God Help the Girl hasn't been filmed yet, so we need that community to kind of be interested and still continue to spread the word onwards. Although I discovered, because I went away and worked on another project, that the Twitter had just been dead after we had got the money. Everyone just stopped doing stuff, and I mean that's kind of quite bad, I think. But yeah, if that answers anything.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, building a community, or building the community I built, because I have only built one in my life, so it's clear it's not about making a film, but it's something for life, and it's putting people together that are aware of something that's happening in their city, and of course you can use that on the one side to empower them, but also to keep making films and making them for the same people. So actually we are making another project now about a very heavy case of police corruption in Barcelona. And we started crowdfunding it, and of course we appealed to the same community. And it took us, like in the other campaign, about 6 months to raise 5,000 euros. In this case, we just started, but like in a couple of days, we already had 5,000 euros, which was, of course, it was like the same community that was aware of what we were going to do, and they were very happy with the result of NORES. So they wanted, when we mentioned the case we were going to document about, they were like totally agree with the subject, so they put money in it. So again, it's a good way to start the project. We don't know if we're going to keep crowdfunding it. I think it's fair to say, okay, that's enough for us to make a teaser, or to make a, you know, and try to get traditional financing with that. So I don't know if this answered your question.
Jennifer?
I can say something a little different than your question, which is how one campaign rolled into another campaign, which I found just so exciting and really answers the question of the panel. Before we did our crowdfunding, we were having real trouble with American distribution of the film. It was doing super well everywhere else, but it doesn't fit the American doc model of political and sexy. It's a spiritual father-son story. The campaign gave us a lot of press and also gave us 6 months of hard work, organizing work, and thinking about how the film could be used. And so from out of our Kickstarter campaign, all of a sudden, many people knew the name of the film in America that had never known it. It was a film that was turned down by every American festival, which I'm an old-time doc filmmaker. I'd had films everywhere in America, and I couldn't get this film into one festival. Suddenly, we were getting into festivals. We could suddenly, very quickly fund a self-theatrical campaign, which I've done before, put together the money maybe in 3 weeks, launch the film in the cinema, and cinema owners had heard about the film, which is really important, and so they were willing to book it. And then out of the campaign, we realized this kind of wide spiritual effect of the film, and we started a spiritual outreach campaign, and we set up not screenings around Buddhism, but partnering people, rabbis, Catholic priests, Zen priests, Christian organizations to co-host screenings. And we started these really wide dialogues across America about the necessity for spirituality, about how different traditions intersect or not. And so the crowdfunding actually got us going and got us thinking and got us moving and moved us to a whole place that we would not have been without it. It was particularly in one territory, which is America. It's quite big. But we then were able to run a theatrical tour that's lasted about a year now and has gone to, I don't know, maybe more than 100 cities, and has actually joined people in a cross-religious dialogue that I actually hadn't predicted. I know I should have, but you're always a little behind. So it was very exciting, and I have to say, without the crowdfunding campaign, it wouldn't have opened the door to my mind, but also to people actually wanting the film, and then to the funding for the theatrical. The same campaign also led us to being placed as the premiere, the opening show in the 25th anniversary season of POV, which is our premier TV documentary slot in America. So we're the first show of the season. So it had all these rollout effects and community effects that I never knew would happen.
Okay. I think you've had your hand up for a little while, the woman in, back there. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Now that you've all successfully raised the money, your crowdfunding campaigns, the next subject that you go on to, the next topic that you approach that isn't related to any of your previous topics, would you start off crowdfunding, or you prefer, are you converted now? Good. That's what I'm trying to say.
I can answer that. I'm I'll be filming again on Monday in Scotland for a Storyville called The Great Hip Hop Hoax, and this is traditionally financed. It's BBC Storyville, BBC Scotland, Creative Scotland. However, we're thinking about, I kind of miss the discussion, although I'm not sure whether I want to take the work on, but I've developed an interactive artwork called Tell Me Lies. The core story of The Great Hip Hop Hoax is about lying. It's about two Scottish rappers who had a huge £1 million record deal with Sony, telling everyone they were from California, but they were actually students from Scotland, and they kept the lie up for 5 years. And it's the idea that we all lie, but they lied really big. So I'm developing an interactive artwork called Tell Me Lies, where I'm going to survey the lies of the public, invite them to lie to me. And part of that is developed because I want this transaction, this dialogue, this conversation with people. But I think we're also going to crowdfund an element of it because it was so valuable on Sound It Out. When I first started making the film, I thought that the shop was going to close. That was going to be the reality. It was taking like £5 some days. And it's weird, like the film articulated what the shop meant to people. And our Facebook group nominated the shop for the Music Week awards, and they won Best Independent Retailer of the Year about a couple of months ago. They beat Rough Trade and these kind of Goliaths. So that to me was this kind of crazy endorsement of how the film didn't change what the shop is, because the shop's great, but the crowdfunding campaign and the people buying into the film articulated what the shop meant to people. And so it's a very rambling answer, but the idea that just seemed really powerful, and I don't want to turn my back on that on further projects.
I think it's a matter of what kind of films do you want to produce. So, of course, if you follow a crowdfunding strategy, your films have to be more lo-fi. Yesterday I didn't get tickets for the main opening, so I had to see another movie which is called indie game, the movie, right? And I think there's a lot of points in common. So it's about these freaky guys making lo-fi games that eventually raise more money than these very, very high budget traditional games and stuff. And for me, I'm converted to crowdfunding, as you said it, because this is exactly the kind of films I want to be engaged with. So films that keep contact with people, who keep everything real, in which you don't need a team of hundreds of people, but you can be just like 3 or 4 people, your friends. And for me, it's a very sincere way of telling stories and making films, to keep it real with the budget too. So I think we still need a hybrid of traditional ways of producing and crowdfunding. But if you could crowdfund 100% your films, that would be, for me, the way to go, because it's more democratic, it's more real.
Mm-hmm. I would say for me, it's one tool in a toolbox, and I'm actually preparing a new film. It's a fiction piece. The subject can't be spoken about, so forget it on crowdfunding. I mean, I can't announce it publicly. It's about real people. If I announce it, I'll lose the subjects. So I think it's a wonderful tool, but it isn't a savior. It can be a piece of your puzzle. It can be your whole puzzle. But it's great to have one more tool. And like I said, I can't use it. I wish I could, but I can't now. So this round won't be crowdfunded.
Okay, yeah. Man in the white shirt.
Thank you for a fascinating session and for addressing issues that be addressed during crowdfunding. And you've restored my kind of determination to follow through a project that was based on research, sort of longitudinal research of people experiencing flooding, not 2 years on when the emergency services have gone and you're still in Iran and fighting the insurance. It's the sort of thing where crowdfunding often people that have actually been flooded across Britain would really be involved. So thank you for inspiring that and getting a sense of how that works as a community. I wanted to ask a really kind of practical question, but sorry, it comes back to the kind of funding issue, which is that it's the sort of differentiation between are people funding the film, or, I mean, I suppose in your case, it's most extreme, are you rescuing my personal finances? Because we made the film and I'm going to go bankrupt. It's how are you presenting the thing as paying for the film when it's actually giving you an income? And then the follow-up question is, what happens to the income that accrues from the film, if any? In other words, if it's not Commons license, how is it justified to the crowdfunding?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. They were paying for the film. This was a 20-year project that I wasn't paid for 20 years, never will be paid, and have some of my own money, and it will never come back. This is just straight on. If you want to see this film, which is the concept of crowdfunding, help. The same campaign could have been launched prior to completion. So this, ironically, in our case, I mean, it's no different than Xavier saying, I don't want to make money. Well, I will never make money from this film. We're just trying to get it out to an audience that was extremely hungry for it. There's never been a 20-year observational film about a high Tibetan master or any high religious figure where you're in his family life for 20 years. It's very rare. So people were super hungry and they wanted to see it, and they were not, in fact, we said that explicitly on the site, none of this will go to us. And it didn't go to us. In fact, even my boyfriend says, well, why didn't you take any money for yourself out of that? It was all real hardcore expenses like post-production, etc. I do want to just offer everybody a service. We did a lot of writing about our campaign, and if you're going to do a campaign, we did 7 articles, which is about 100 pages of information of how to run a crowdfunding campaign. And you can find it on our website, myreincarnationfilm.com, under press crowdfunding, and it was on IndieWire. You can also look it up. The reason I offer that is we were asked by 2 very big publishing houses to write a book about crowdfunding, and our team, and in fact, as a team, we decided we didn't want to write a book and sell it, that we wanted to give away our information in the spirit of how we had learned it. So we're going to turn these articles actually into a free ebook in the next couple months. But the same articles are there for everybody to find and use, and they're really useful. So go for it if you need it, especially with your campaign coming. Yeah.
There's
Yes,
just
please.
something I want to make clear very briefly. I said I don't want to make money out of that. I think I didn't express myself well. Having a non-commercial production company like mine, or using Creative Commons, doesn't mean that you don't make money out of it. It means like everybody who's working with you and yourself are getting paid for their work, which is something which is very basic in every work relationship. So you have to get paid for the work you make, and I believe I don't want to work in a bar to be able to make my films. I want to live from my films. The difference in our case, in having a non-commercial project, means that we don't want to get the money from the copyright forever for the work we're doing, which is what most of the famous artists are doing right now. So, as an example, if you are a cook and you are cooking something, you're going to get paid for this dish, but you're not going to be paid forever for the dish that you made that day. So for me, that's the best example, and I think, it works like that in almost every aspect of life. Why does it work differently in music and culture? Why should you get money forever? Especially when you, the creator, are not the one who's getting the money, but another distribution company or a television channel or a production company. So just wanted to make that clear. And to answer you, I think it's for us, and this is a discussion that I have every time I talk to other people who are crowdfunding projects in Barcelona. For me, it's a must to have a Creative Commons license. Because if you are asking, if you are trying to have a democratic way of financing your project, you need to have a social return. You need to give something to society. So this is exactly how I think that public funding should work. So I don't know how it's in England, but in Spain there's a lot of public funding. Well, not anymore now, they're cutting everything, but the funding we get for culture, you can put a copyright on it, and then it's supposed to be sold in shopping malls, etc. For me, if it's money that people are paying with taxes, it should be given back to people for free. And that's exactly what we are trying to do with our project. So people are paying for our cultural projects through crowdfunding, and we're giving it back for free. So that's the point for me.
Thank you, Javier. So we're about to wrap up, but I thought first, I wondered if any of the panelists have anything they'd like to, any final words on this.
I would say if anyone's going to crowdfund, really think long and hard whether your project fits, whether you have a whole lot of time and energy, and whether you want the discussion with people. Because it's not like shaking the money tree and you're going to get wet. It's just, if you build it, they'll come. They won't come. You've got to do a whole lot of work. But the benefits are, if it's the right project at the right time and you throw yourself into it, it can be totally worth it. But you have to be very realistic about why you're doing it and whether you're up for doing it and whether you've got a team that can do it.
So thanks. I mean, I found that really inspiring. And, you know, what's so interesting is that there are these incredibly tangible benefits. I mean, projects which commissioners have ignored, have turned down, have turned their noses up, which get funded, audiences developed, exposure for projects, really tangible. But also, in a way, the inspiring thing to me was the less tangible results in terms of people being affirmed in subjects which they felt were important, but actually were encouraged by that interaction with the public, and ways of working supported that wouldn't be supported necessarily by a broadcaster. So, thank you very much for this panel. It's been really interesting. Okay.